Yeah, well, just come to my office. I'll take it.
Yeah.
Jess, we good? Can we start? Yeah. All right, everybody, I'm going to call us to order. It's a pleasure to have you all here on a very warm Berkeley day, unseasonably so. But thank you all for coming for what is an important and timely conversation. We're never sure when we do these snap panels how many are going to be in the room. It turns out a lot of you, which is great, and really excited about our panelists and the wisdom that they have to share. Before we begin, I want to turn the floor over to Sean, who represents one of our new registered student organizations on campus focused on defense and dual use. We have a slew of programming, so this is something of coming attractions, like a trailer to a movie. So Sean, over to you.
Hi, everyone. So by means of introduction, my name is Sean. I'm a first-year MPP over at Goldman. See a lot of familiar faces. My background, I was in the Marine Corps doing active duty. Now I'll be here in reserves. Just a quick minute. Just want to talk to you guys about defense and dual use here at Berkeley. It was started by two HOS students, a couple of Army veterans as well. Others kind of working in consulting, working from the Pentagon. Really just the objective of this community is for education and opportunity, both in national security and then specifically in dual use tech. Some events that we did already, we've gone out to different companies around Alameda, one of which was Sail Drones that does essentially autonomous boats. So looking at oceanography, ocean mapping, as well as having that defense side of it that can also kind of security in littorals. Just want to take just like 30 seconds, just real quick, with that purpose, some of the events that we have coming up. So starting in April 8th, Chu Hall over at the Hospital of Business, we begin the speaker series. What that looks like is it's one Wednesday, so it's, or excuse me, every Wednesday until about May. Just bringing different speakers, learning from them, the kind of opportunities they have. The first ones we have on the books is going to be the former CTO of the CIA. So a lot of big names, a lot of great opportunity to learn from them and kind of see what kind of opportunities different students, regardless of your background, grad student, whether you're in engineering, policy, business, law, really looking to grow the community. Beyond that, there's also participation in what's called the Stanford Hackathon, now Stanford and Cal. It's going to be sponsored. I believe that's May 1st and 3rd in San Francisco. It's going to look a lot like the hack defense structure, just shortened, right? So it's, hey, Army is going to sponsor it. We're going to get a problem set. We're going to sit, put clients together, and think of different objectives and ways that we can solve problems for the warfighter. So if you're interested, I'm going to, after this session, I'm going to sit in the back. I'll have the QR code open. Please come ask me questions. Scan it on your phone. There's a quick sign-up sheet, and we can send you kind of the Berkeley brief for more information. So thank you.
Thanks, Sean. And eventually, of course, they'll be the Cal and Stanford night. All right, perfect. Welcome, everybody. So we're here for a panel, The War Everyone Should Have Seen Coming, the U.S.-Iran conflict. I am Professor Andrew Reddy, professor at the Goldman School of Public Policy, and I'm the faculty director of the Berkeley Security Lab. Before I start, thank you, Jess and Daniel and Susan, for hosting us here at the Institute of International Studies. Thank you also to the Berkeley Institute of Security and Governance, whose fellows are here, and then obviously also BRSL, also sponsoring this as well, this important conversation. So just very brief bios. Each of them has a bio book that's well worth like 2 or 3 pages. I'm going to keep this very short for your time. So to my left, I have Professor Sahar Razavi, Associate Professor of Political Science and Director of the Iranian American Studies Center, and faculty scholar of the SWANA Center at Sacramento State University. We may beat you for heat like the first time today here at Berkeley. To her left, we have Tom Moran, CIA Senior Intelligence Service, 6-time Chief of Station across all sorts of locations here in the United States, East Asia, Western Europe, West Africa, and importantly for our conversation, the Middle East. He's also currently the director of the Intelligence Project here at BISG. And then finally, Jeff Fields, FBI counterterrorism veteran, who also worked the Middle East in operations and is senior fellow of practice at BISG. So thank you all for taking the time to join us this afternoon. So I want to start off, and Tom, I'll start with you. The panel title kind of suggests that this conflict was predictable. So where exactly, from your perspective, do you think warning failed? Was this an intelligence failure, a policy failure, or a failure of imagination about potential escalation pathways?
Well, I'll just start by adding that for most of my career, I did operations. That's what studying forcing embarrassed to Rusty, but, and work that issue set. We have a microphone. And yes.
Oh, I might need to.
What's this?
This one probably shut off. I know. It's on for a while.
And then I have good jobs.
Working? Yeah, there we go. Spent a lot of my career doing Iranian stuff. As I said, I studied Farsi, which also got me an all expense paid trip to Afghanistan in 2001 that I really enjoyed. So I haven't done this stuff for years, but I'm obviously very interested in what's going on right now. And as far as intelligence failure, policy failure, it certainly was an intelligence failure on the part of the Islamic Republic, because they didn't see this coming, I think, and they should have seen it coming. I think they really thought that the Trump administration, based on its statements about not getting involved in forever wars and the American public's aversion to conflicts in the Middle East, thought that they wouldn't launch something like this, and obviously they were very wrong. So I think definitely a big intelligence failure on this part of the Iranians. On the American side, policy-wise, you guys can judge how you think this thing is going as far as communication strategy, how this is being communicated to the American people, what our objectives are. Those are all things I think that the administration really needs to keep in mind as it moves forward. Getting Congress involved. Congress, if nothing else, should be demanding to be involved and have a say in this at this point, and vote some kind of war authorization. But that doesn't seem to be in the works. So that's also something I think the administration should consider, obviously, to go to Congress and to our allies as well. This is something that we should coordinate with our allies. We have some great partners both in the region and in Europe who could be very helpful in doing things like, say, securing the Straits of Hormuz. And unfortunately, I don't think that's happening right now. So going forward, as far as policy challenges, the administration, the United States really has to figure out what exactly are we trying to accomplish here. Regime change, I think, would be probably the best option at this point, given the fact that if you leave that regime in the Islamic Republic in power, you have pretty much sold out the Iranian people, who have shown a strong desire for its overthrow. We don't take that advantage now. I think both the Iranian people and our allies in the region are going to be left with an Islamic Republic that's denigrated but angry, and is not going to change any of its policy objectives, including its nuclear program. And again, the Straits of Hormuz, critical piece of moving forward. How are we going to do this? And also an explanation from our national security apparatus to explain to us explain how difficult it is to do this and what some of the requirements are going to be going forward. So I am honest, I followed and worked against the Islamic Republic for all of my career. I'm not sad to see Ali Khamenei gone, but I hope we have the attention span and the dedication to finish this job going forward.
Very good. So you're already kind of taking us into kind of where we find ourselves at the present moment. For Sahar, I'm curious if you can provide some context. What were the key decision points on both the U.S. and the Iranian side where this crisis could have potentially been de-escalated, but instead it was intensified? What does that tell us about crisis stability in the region more generally?
It's a great question. Thanks for having me. There are a lot of decisions that could have de-escalated this before we got here. But for me, if you have to choose one point where it starts to diverge, it was when Donald Trump pulled the United States unilaterally out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2018, otherwise known as the Iran nuclear deal. Now, there are a lot of arguments that people make for and against the nuclear deal. This statement is not meant as an endorsement or a criticism of the nuclear deal itself. But we can see, if we trace the lineage of the foreign policy objectives and the decisions of the Trump administration, we can trace the path to this war back to 2018 most prominently. Although, of course, there are other junctures where you can identify this path. I would say in the second Trump administration, one of the reasons that I'd like to speak to Tom's point about the failure of Iranian intelligence, which in my mind dovetails with the answer to this question. One of the reasons that the Iranians did not see it coming is because it was a very, very bad idea. Seriously, there is a reason that, and when I say bad idea, I'm not talking normatively. I don't mean we should or should not do it. I mean, when you line up the foreseeable consequences with the US's foreign policy objectives in the region, you can see that those two do not align. So again, this is not a normative statement. I myself am not in favor of the Islamic Republic. I hate that we all have to, Tom included, we all have to say that every time we talk about Iran. God forbid anybody think, right? But when we look logically, right, in political science, we look at rationality. Rationality is not, in colloquial terms, we say that person's so rational, they're so smart. That's not what it means for us. It means, can you order your own priorities, and then can you make decisions in accordance with priorities? And when you look at the way the United States has prosecuted this war on Iran, you can see that those two are not aligned. So all of this is within the realm of what decisions were made where this could have been de-escalated. The decision to strike in June in the midst of negotiations put us closer on this path. That represented a failure of diplomacy and a break with customary norms of diplomacy. Again, not a statement of whether it was right or wrong, just you can see how it would escalate the situation. And in response, Iran made it clear that their doctrine of reciprocity was done away with after that. Prior to that, anytime they were attacked by the US or Israel or their allies, they would telegraph out their response so that those facilities could be evacuated. There would be minimal damages or casualties. And the point of that is not because they're altruistic, it's because they were trying to avoid a direct, outright hot war confrontation. After the 12-day war, they said, we're not doing that anymore. Clearly, it's not helping us. And our doctrine is shifting to a much more assertive, basically strike you until you call uncle type of posture. And that's where we are today. So the 12-day war was another point where the decisions that were made put us closer on this path. The reason, getting to the title of the talk, that maybe people feel like we should have seen it coming, but a lot of people didn't, is because, again, for the United States, it was a very bad idea. And there are reasons that every single United States president, going back 20 years plus, has decided against such a strike, in spite of the fact that there is vast bipartisan hostility toward the Islamic Republic for many very understandable reasons. Nobody thought that this would happen in this way because of the foreseeable consequences, economic, security, and otherwise, being so catastrophic.
Of course, they were negotiating in Geneva.
That's right.
The attack session started. For Jeff, I think, even in the title of the panel, but I think also as the kind of in the journalism or media world around this conflict as well, there's a tendency to think about this in the context of just the U.S. and Iran. But the question for you is, to what extent is this conflict really bilateral, or actually involving all sorts of other players across the region and beyond? To what extent should we be paying attention to proxies, partner forces, and how does that complicate deterrence, attribution, and ultimately an end game for the U.S. as well?
Yeah, I think, sorry. For me, that was the primary touch point in terms of the, so I worked Iran Matters for 10 to 12 years as well, and was, on teams where essentially our job was to find, fix, and essentially try to prevent those proxies and other entities within, to a lesser extent, the MIS, which is their intelligence service, but the IRGC Quds Force, which are the individuals empowered and resourced to actually go out and kill people outside of Iran. And so seeing that up close and personal across the world, across 6 continents, that ran unabated up until now, where, I just saw the FBI announce they had arrested, or someone had been arrested and confessed to being sent here by the Iranian intel service to assassinate members of the first Trump administration and others within the government. So that case of targeting Israelis, Jews, and Americans never abated, ever. During JCPOA 1 with Obama, JCPOA Light after Trump, never abated. And so I think that quick digression may have also fed into the Iranians not only thinking that it was very stupid for the Americans to attack, but also, well, we've kind of always been allowed to play in this gray, right? And we've never had our hands smacked for playing in the gray. And I recall when Secretary Mattis was over CENTCOM, sharing frustration with him, and we joked about it later on after he left service, under Obama, Ambassador Wendy Sherman, who had kind of acknowledged that, it was very frustrating for them to communicate the things that most reasonable people felt were necessary to hold the Iranians accountable to, that for the folks immediately around Obama would not even entertain because they wanted to get a JCPOA done by all means necessary. And we were like, well, hey, how about just stop killing Jews?
How about just stop attacking?
How about just stop attacking Americans overseas? Like, how about we just say, nope, nothing? Significant targets that we weren't allowed to go after. And so a lot of frustration around what appeared to be kind of this acknowledgement and then acceptance that, well, Iran is just going to be Iran and they're going to do what they do. The Quds Force is going to do what they do. Hezbollah is going to do what Hezbollah does. They're going to, and remember, Iran annually $2 billion to Hamas, between Hamas, the Houthis, and Hezbollah, $2 billion a year. From 2011 to 2020, $30 to $50 billion to Bashar al-Assad. So this is a regime that literally funds death and terror that was never addressed with the JCPOA. And so I think to your question, another reason why those who are astute observers of Iran would assess that this was probably not the best way to execute this plan now is if you saw where, primarily as a result of the invasion of Iraq, which we all consensus that was a very bad idea, we allowed the Beta organization to establish a foothold in Iraq, which is a proxy of Iran. The Houthis empowered in Yemen, Hezbollah empowered in Lebanon, and Bashar al-Assad empowered in Syria. So now you've got this incredible sphere of influence that Iran never in their wildest dreams could have done on their own if we hadn't given that to them by breaking Iraq open. However, within the last 18 months to 24 months, we saw that essentially crumble. But if you look at the enrichment attempts by the Iranian regime, there was a commensurate inverse portion to, as their stronghold of influence fell in these other areas with other proxies, their attempts to pursue enrichment increased. I mean, beginning of the year, they were at 60%, which is enough. And within 3 weeks, the IAEA said that they could probably produce 10 nuclear bombs. This beginning of last year, right? And so if you're Iran, you're saying, well, we've lost our ability to exert influence through these proxies across the region. The only other thing that we have to prevent what is happening right now is to hold the world at threat with a nuclear capability, right? Iran is the only country at 60% enrichment that doesn't publicly acknowledge a nuclear weapons program. But yet they keep saying that this is for civilian purposes. So I think to your question, yes, the proxies and the extent to which Iran has enjoyed a lot of joy, has experienced a lot of joy building those proxies to, aggravate the United States. If you had been observing that, you would have seen that, okay, if you were going to strike, you might want to have a more comprehensive policy plan to go along with whatever kinetic actions you were planning to take. I mean, you think about, again, too, why this is not probably the best thing right now, objectively speaking, is the Gulf states who are being attacked now, there was over $1 trillion of investment promised and committed. $1 trillion, most of which the United States is going to benefit from. Now, $1 trillion investment collectively held at bay by $20,000 drones. Make that make sense. I mean, seriously, $20,000 drones are holding collectively $1 trillion of investment at bay.
Yeah, well, I think a piece of that is the alliance relationship. I mean, certainly.
Remind us.
I usually talk loud enough that I scare my students. In terms of setting the stage, I think that's something that surprised me, right? They didn't bring the allies along, and they're paying the price for that. Certainly in my career, I can't imagine. I have never seen the alliance relationships be as bad as they are right now, even amongst the United Kingdom has been more or less following the US. So the next question I have for you, and then I'm going to start pulling up from the room as well. So just kind of find me, and I'll add you to the list. So Jeff, you kind of brought out the proxies, and that points to kind of the regional aspects of the conflict and the fact that this isn't just an Iran issue. It's not even just a Strait of Hormuz issue. And so for Sahar first, and then Tom, in terms of where this conflict goes next, I mean, how worried are you about regional spillover? The fact that we've got expeditions in South Lebanon, right? You've got attacks across the Gulf into Saudi Arabia, as far afield as Cyprus.
Is that where you think
Things are moving, or do you think that the 12-day war is maybe more likely in terms of like a petering out, as military material is kind of spent out, and then we'll kind of open it up?
All right, so my response is not going to be with the experience of the intelligence community like they have. As an academic, I can tell you that this is not like the 12-day war. There has already been escalation and intensification to such a point that several bright red lines have been crossed. If we set aside the fact that assassinating extrajudicially world leaders who not only you are not at war with, but also it's in the midst of negotiations with them, really it's very provocative, especially given the network of proxies that Jeff discussed. That already represents an escalation that we can't easily unwind. That was just the opening salvo. When we get to the other bright red lines, as of yesterday, Ali Larijani was assassinated. Now, for those of you who may not know, Larijani was one of the most powerful men in insiders in the regime. He, within the context of the Iranian political system, was considered to be a consensus builder and a moderate. Now, maybe not moderate as we might consider it ideologically, but in the context of that system, he was one of the few people who could and was in favor of diplomatic and negotiated ends to conflicts. The pattern is escalation, intensification, escalation, intensification. One bright red line that the Iranian government declared was energy infrastructure. As of last night and this morning, the Pars natural gas deal has been struck. We know from after the United States and Israel blew up the oil depots in Tehran and sent 10 million barrels of oil into the sky as flames and smoke, that I don't want to say reciprocation, because that's again not the doctrine anymore, but the response was that Iran hit the oil refinery in Haifa. The Strait of Hormuz closing is not just 20% of the world's oil, it's 30% of the world's natural gas, and very significant portions of the sulfur and urea that passes through the world. And those are very important for fertilizer, for diesel fuel. Our food is about to get a lot more expensive. A lot of things are about to get. And so we can see in response, Iran hit the Ras Laffan natural gas field or refinery, in Qatar. This is only going to keep intensifying. And if we keep seeing assassinations, which I suspect we will, then speaking to Jeff's point from earlier, we probably will start seeing assassinations here. That would be a dramatic departure from what has happened before on US soil. And unfortunately for us, Iran is going to, maybe not, again, normatively, not what we would like, but credibly in the public eye on the street, so to speak, on the Arab street and the Iranian street, they're going to be able to say, they did it first and we are reciprocating. And so this degradation of whatever tenuous residue of an international rules-based order that remained is being just completely annihilated at this point. And that I don't think is easy to pull back from. And the other thing is you can easily close the Strait of Hormuz. It actually takes 0 sea mines to close the Strait of Hormuz. It only takes people believing that sea mines have been placed. It's a lot harder to reopen it. And that is, I just read walking into this room that Donald Trump was asked if anybody briefed him that if Iran were attacked, it could potentially retaliate by striking energy infrastructure and closing the Strait of Hormuz. And he said, no, nobody told me. So either if you believe it, that's pretty catastrophic, right? If you don't believe it, what does it tell us as the American public that he wants us to think he had no idea? I'm very concerned about what's going to happen next. That's setting aside, I know the whole focus here, sorry, this will be my last point, and then I'll pass it over to Tom. I don't want it to get lost here that the probably people who already have and are going to suffer the most are Iranian civilians. There's already, the count is already a couple thousand, and that's just the very conservative estimate of who we've been able to count. And we're probably going to see Gulf War syndrome across Iranian cities because of these oil depots being blown up. We are probably we've already seen attacks on hospitals and healthcare workers, on schools, on other civilian infrastructure. Shortages are going to cause misery. Hospitals are not going to be able to run. I want us to not forget that where the pain points are right now. And that's if we manage to avoid total state collapse, which I think, speaking to one of the earlier questions, I think the Trump administration's goal is regime change, and the Israeli government's goal is total state collapse. And those two are somewhat at odds with each other. And that's why you have even longtime Iran hawks like Lindsey Graham saying, wait, you shouldn't be striking their energy infrastructure because complete state collapse leaves no one there left for us to have any kind of a diplomatic relationship with.
Yeah, I mean, regime change needs to be carefully thought out and done. And I'm hoping that's what's going on. And as for the intelligence that the president is receiving, I have a pretty good idea of what that looks like. And he's getting, the full suite of oral briefings from every agency that you can think of, the president's daily brief. So the analysis is certainly getting there. As far as the proxies, I mean, at the risk of tempting fate here, the response has been relatively muted. And that's one of the reasons I think for the strike at this time is because the proxies have been deeply affected by the Israelis and us over the last 2 years or so. So the ability of them to strike and conduct operations ain't what it used to be, ain't for any of them. As far as assassinations in the United States, they have tried to do that before. We found that the Hezbollah networks and the proxies that were in place have really deteriorated over the years, to the point where they tried to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in Washington and ended up using some used car salesman that they got through a drug cartel. So the ability of the services to conduct lethal operations, I think it's not what it used to be. As far as regional, I was on a call yesterday with an advisor to the president of the UAE who was angry. And he wasn't angry at us or the Israelis. He was angry at the Iranians for launching 2,000 missiles and drones at the UAE. I think that's also a huge miscalculation on the part of the Islamic Republic, because Gulf Arab regimes have never been particularly enamored of their Iranian counterpart, and they're certainly not loving them right now. So we're even, and in the initial stages, I think they did have what they believed was a gentleman's agreement that they would not allow us to launch from their bases. They didn't want to get involved in return for the Iranians not targeting their territory. Well, that's gone out the window in all of these countries, all the way from Oman up to Cyprus. Also, regional conflict-wise, and the professor is in much better position, I think, to explain the dynamics of the ethnicities in Iran. But certainly the Kurds are probably looking for their opportunity at this point. The Baluch and the Sunni Arabs, there's also a minority in Iran as well. So there's a possibility. And, you know, in the past, I've worked with the Kurds in Iraq. There is an Iranian Kurdish party, an element and militia on the Iraqi side of the border. So the problem with that is, and that fosters regional instability. The Turks and the Pakistanis really don't like these ethnic minorities trying to assert their rights. So again, back to, you're going to do regime change, fine, but we need to figure out what that looks like. And unfortunately, there are not a lot of great options.
Very good. Jeff, you want to take that too? And make sure to catch my eye. I've already got Pearson's list.
Yeah, I was just going to say about the regional instability, right? The reports now of folks, fleeing Iran across the Afghan border, when years ago it was Afghans fleeing across to the Iranian border. And guess what's going on right now between Afghanistan and Pakistan, right? So, and before Bashar al-Assad was in Syria, there is someone in control of Syria now who hates Iran, the Iranian regime, probably more than the United States. So now how does that factor into the stability of the region with everything going on, right? The Israelis are now, bombarding Beirut, and there's talk of a land invasion into Beirut. So again, going back to the regional instability, your point about a failed state, what that really means. I think it gets very bad before we even get to that point. I don't, to Tom's point, and again, the whole purpose of this is where we want to be as objective as possible to present to you all our perspectives, the things that we've observed, and to present to you to come to your own conclusions. But I feel like, now at this point, like if you think about the regime change in Iran, it didn't work out so well for us the last time we did it, right? And again, talking about how we got here, that's really that was the genesis of all of this, is us not listening to the folks in Iran. And you look at the pictures of Iran from that time. I mean, women were wearing mini skirts and men, it was like a cosmopolitan, paradise and even today, I think Iran has the highest number of women with PhDs under the persecution today. Incredibly proud and magnificent culture, right? And we didn't listen to them in the 50s about, hey, those radicals you're talking to, there's a reason why they're like in the corner, nobody talks to them. They're insane. You might not want to rely on them for your whole coup plan, right? We didn't listen to them, right? And we saw what happened in 1979. And again, another part of why we are where we are today. But I think kind of like the Colin Powell doctrine, we broke it. So we better figure it out. And I don't see how this works in anyone's favor, especially the Iranian people, that doesn't involve some type of regime change. But what does that look like? And whatever it looks like, it can't just be the United States. It can't just be the Gulf states. It has to be something completely different than what we've ever done before, because anything other than, to your point, anything other than removing the people who are in power right now, I don't see how that ever works out well for the Iranian people, which ultimately would never work out well for the United States.
Yeah.
All right. I'll try to make it brief. I know I'm taking up extra time here. I want to, in continuation of what you have just presented, if our priority in the United States were to remove the people in power, is setting aside, the debate about whether we should be doing any of that. Setting that aside, if we just start from the starting point of granting that we should be trying to do that, attacking Iran's military and political leadership in this way, twice in the midst of negotiations in less than the span of 9 months, set that goal back by a lot. And let me explain why. Because in the history of the Islamic Republic, any foreign attacks against the leadership have done the complete opposite of what we know in the study of revolutions and regime change actually is needed for that kind of change, which is elite fracture. Every foreign attack on Iran since the establishment of the Islamic Republic has led to elite cohesion. It has further empowered the hardline factions. It has pushed them closer to believing that they needed a nuclear weapon as deterrence. The 60% enrichment that they had, and even by some reports higher than that, was for that, it was a leverage point so that they could get a better deal in any negotiations. Even Tulsi Gabbard's report from March of last year said they didn't have evidence that they had a weapons program. The whole idea for them, as far as they were concerned, was to be a threshold state so that they could have some kind of deterrent capability that would keep exactly this from happening. And now they are wounded, as Tom said. They are angry, and the new supreme leader is now someone whose father, wife, son, sister, brother-in-law, and other family members have been assassinated. And it was his father who said, again, I don't know the guy, I don't know if this was what they were actually doing, but the fact that Ali Khamenei felt that it was important for him to issue a religious fatwa saying that a nuclear weapon is contrary to Islamic law because of the detriment to ordinary civilians. The fact that he felt that he needed to present that to the Iranian public reflected that he was, in large part, he was trying to stay within the norms, the gentleman's agreements, all those. Again, they may have been clandestinely pursuing him. I don't know. That's above my pay grade, as you say. But I can say that now the son is much more likely to listen to the hardliner factions, the harder liner factions, than even the former supreme leader, who have been saying, see, we told you we needed a nuclear weapon. So now there's more elite cohesion, they're wounded, they're vengeful, they're angry, and they're going to use this as a pretext, if they survive this war, to further securitize society, to implement mass deportations, arbitrary arrests, executions, suspension of due process, deportations. Sorry, I think I said that one already. It's in every sense, life is going to get more difficult for the Iranian people if the Islamic Republic survives this. And if they don't survive it, the Kurds have made clear, the Kurdish leadership has made clear, they don't want any part of this regime change operation. They have aspirations for autonomy, but they don't want to be used as political pawns. And so they've told the United States, they've told Israel, we want autonomy. We don't want to confront the regime militarily, because we don't think that's going to work out well for us in Iranian society as a whole. So where does that leave us? Where does that leave Iranians? I see much more death and destruction unless somebody's able to get us off this carnival wheel that's on fire.
Very good. I had Pierce and then in the back, and also I'll take the two together and then let whoever respond. Feel free to direct your questions to the panelists too. Makes my life easier. Then I've got Ritwig from here on this as well. Here's the thing.
So before the June 12 strikes last year, right, the IAEA had confirmed that the uranium stockpile had gone way up in quantity, reached up to 60%. And since last June, they haven't been able to go and verify anything. Now that the upper echelons of the regime have been assassinated, and whoever rises into power, whether it's the regime change, whether there's state collapse, and then someone else comes to power, regardless, both states are likely to be very untrusting of them. And do you think that there will be more of an expansion of nuclear sharing agreements, such as Saudi Arabia and Pakistan in the Gulf states, but is now seeing sort of reputational destruction for the UAE's sense of security, economic destruction in Bahrain, where now they're really angry that they have become targets? Do you think there's going to be more willingness to reach those types of agreements and more eagerness to catch the gold dream?
Right, so what one there and all the way back.
Yes, I've been around academia for a long, long time. And it seems like in degrees from lesser to greatest, from left to right, that you all are ideologically telling people what they must believe in order to advance their careers. I would offer that maybe the CIA and MI6 should not have overthrown democracy in Iran in 1953, which led to all of this. My question is, if you look at all the dictatorial and authoritarian governments and regimes the US has installed and supported armed and or financed, it's obvious that when the US calls for democracy and only their chosen third or second world so-called enemies or adversaries, it's not about democracy. It's about the US installing someone who will do what the US says. And that can be shown in places from South Korea to Libya. And so I'm wondering what you all have to say about that and what you, the CIA person, have to say about the US, the CIA and MI6 overthrowing democracy in 1953 to install a brutal dictator.
Yeah, so that was more like Jeff's point, right? So getting rid of Mossadegh and installing the Shah maybe wasn't the best idea in the world. So that's been spoken to a little bit, but I am curious about if you got responses to.
Yeah, I mean, sorry. Kind of what Sahar alluded to, right? It's kind of like this almost unavoidable security dilemma where, you know, Malcolm X had a very astute observation when China tested their nuclear weapon and recognized that, you know, because China wasn't really considered or really respected as a significant consideration the day before they tested the nuclear weapon, right? And the minute they did, they entered the nuclear weapons club, which meant now they could have a seat at the big boy, big girls table. And there's a reality around why Pyongyang has never been invaded, because they have nuclear weapons. And depending on who you talk to, you are relatively close to having the capacity to reach at least somewhere on the West Coast, right? And so regimes like Iran see that. And yes, there was kind of this understanding that, okay, we reserve the right to have a certain level of enrichment that gives us threshold standoff so that if we need to, we can get to a few bombs. And I think people are missing, right? The regime has an incredibly elaborate, while degraded, but still elaborate global network that can move material, people, money, right? Can you imagine what would happen if just half of that physical material were to make its way out of Iran and into Munich, Brooklyn, right? Thailand, right? So it isn't just, hey, we're afraid of them putting this on the tip of a ballistic missile, right? But I think to your point, there's kind of been, for anyone who's worked in the Middle East in national security, there's kind of been this, you know, like the three countries that, you know, were adamant that Iran not be allowed to get a nuclear weapon because they would pursue one: Saudi, the Emirates, and Egypt. Can you all imagine the Middle East with a nuclear Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and UAE, right? And so understanding that, again, how do we get here? Surely there were enough smart people to appreciate that, to factor that into any calculus for whether we do or don't go to war with Iran in the way that we are currently at war with Iran. And so I feel like there was, as imperfect as it was, the initial JCPOA, and at a minimum, it gave us the ability to actually have people on the ground, right? And if you're going to get rid of that, you better have something in place, because you're essentially determining their trajectory, because you're giving the Iranians no other option, the regime no other option than what they reason in their head is, well, the only leverage we have is a nuclear weapons program or threshold standoff. Part of negotiations, you have to at least entice the other party with, you know, some reasonable expectation that there's something to gain, right? Again, remember, this is a regime. Now, there's some debate, and you probably know this much better than I do, the degree to which the martyrdom ideology factors into it. But there is, particularly within the Quds Force, a very strong martyrdom ideology. So how do you reason with someone who actually views this potential pathway as hastening their, elevation, spiritually? How do you reason with them? You're not going to deter them by killing them. If they're alive, you're just going to make them more determined and more angry, right? So, great question, great observation. It's something that anyone who's ever worked national security in the Middle East knows, is that one of the main things that people don't say out loud is impetus for preventing Iran from getting nuclear programs, because we didn't want Egypt, Saudi, and the Emirates to get a nuclear weapon, because they absolutely would. Saudi, number one. The minute Iran got a nuclear weapon, Saudi would get one. So, great question, great observation again. And there are people in the administration who know this. Joint Chiefs, very, very capable individual. There were people who knew what we're talking about. So again, it's like, to your point, well, it's very bad for us whether he lied or whether he didn't, nobody told him. But I find it very hard to believe that, there were not people at the very top who were very aware of all the things we're talking about now. And that hopefully will become more apparent to those of you here in this audience as you kind of understand the genesis of what we're talking about.
With all due respect, Malcolm X would have recognized the sheer hypocrisy of this U.S. attack on Iran. And also, you didn't answer my question. And lastly, with all due respect, I find you the most propagandistic and idealist and ideological person on the panel. So I don't think you should be invoking Malcolm X about this. You would recognize the imperialism and the hypocrisy in all of this.
Okay.
And you did answer my question.
What was your question specifically?
My question was, when the U.S. is talking about democracy in a second or third world country, it's not about democracy. It's been proven by all the dictatorial, monarchical, and authoritarian regimes the U.S. has supported since World War II. And so obviously the U.S. installed and supported a 40-year dictatorship in South Korea right after World War II. So obviously these things are not about democracy. My question was, is it not about the U.S. wanting to install someone who will do what they say? And that's usually an authoritarian or dictatorial government, because the last thing the U.S. would want in any Middle Eastern country is a true democracy.
To be fair, it's not entirely clear what the Trump administration does actually want, right?
Sorry?
The Trump administration said any number of things. It's not the pro-democracy is but one piece of the puzzle, but it could also be arresting the nuclear forces. It could also be dealing with the fact that they killed 30,000 protesters. Yeah, so tens of thousands. So ultimately, the U.S.
all U.S. presidents, except for maybe Kennedy, just goes back to Truman.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we got others in the room too.
Let's wrap up. This goes back to Truman, who installed a dictator in South Korea right after World War II, and the U.S. supported dictatorship there for the next.
There's nobody on the
40
panel that's arguing that the U.S. is doing this for pro-democracy. The administration doesn't know whether it's doing it either.
Okay.
So Rick, I'll come to you, and then we'll come to the rest of the panel. Yeah, Rick, get them.
I'm terrified of the Gene having a nuclear weapon, but I've also done some events, which is really motivated by the conflict against Muslims. So I think they're motivated by the Makba. I mean, I keep saying the Nakba. I'm saying against the Muslims, and over their history, especially with the present regime, they persecuted a lot of Jews. I think that they're trying to get a mutually assured destruction doctrine established against the Israelis. And also, I've learned that they have great depth in their regime. There are many people ready and able and willing to take over the positions of anybody that's assassinated. Also, it's interesting that during World War II, when there was an incredible amount of bombing of Germany, their war production went up every year, every 6 months into the last 6 months. So I don't think that this is going to be as effective as we hoped. What was the other thing? I think the mutually assured destruction doctrine that we practiced with the Soviets and the Saudis and the others I'm not sure about the others, but I'm sure Saudi would get something to assure, mutually assured destruction and so on. And in the region, it might be all of that kind of thing. So, but that's very volatile. Anyway, that's just a comment.
Perfect. I'll go to Rui.
Thank you for your thoughts. You both mentioned previously that Iran's ability to wage war through proxies has significantly degraded over the years. I wanted to hear from all of you what the fear was about domestic radicalization and domestic mobilization of Iranian forces. You know, there's all this talk of sleeper cells, but even, you know, sympathists in America. What is being, what is the current stance on all?
I can talk about it from a conceptual standpoint, and I'm sure have much more concrete knowledge about that than I do. And I think the answer to this question can actually kind of weave together some of the threads of the other questions. To a great extent, Iran's kind of the ideological underpinnings of the Islamic Republic, not just martyrdom, although that's an important part of it, it is this axis of resistance. It's this, they present themselves as standing up to US and Zionist imperialism, right? And so the way that you suck the oxygen out of that is by starving them of fuel for that kind of narrative. And this kind of attack, my argument is, fuels them rather than, right? Decapitation strikes don't work against a regime that, as you rightly point out, is extremely institutionalized. It's very entrenched, and it is not a cult of personality held together by one tent pole that you take out that person and everything collapses. They've made clear, getting to your point earlier, that they're going to take everybody down with them if it comes to that. And that's part of their axis of resistance. They are punishing the Gulf states for allying with the United States and allowing their territories to be used to, and that is also in some ways a two-level game for them. That they are mobilizing the Arab street because their populations in those GCC states are largely sympathetic to Iran, even though the leadership is very hostile to it. So this is one of these attacks on GCC states are one way for Iran to put pressure indirectly on the United States, because the thought is these GCC states are either going to pressure Trump to end this, or they're going to go down for refusing to do that. So, sorry, I'm trying to weave all the threads together. I know, that's what I do in class, and that's why my classes all go till the last possible second. Okay, so the question of trying to weave in the ideological base here, along with the entrenchment, the institutionalization, and the lack of care for democracy, which is well established. I think that we're going to see, in terms of the degradation of its proxy networks, we're going to see that being less and less relevant for how they move forward. Because the axis of resistance narrative for them is being strengthened by what's happening right now. And many Iranians, according to the most reliable public opinion data we have, the majority of Iranians don't want an Islamic Republic. They want a secular system, they want a separation of religion and state, and they don't think that that's going to happen without fundamental changes to the system. That's the most reliable data we have. We don't have a lot of surveys, but the ones we have say that. That said, most of them are not willing to collaborate with foreign powers to bring that about. So even Iranians who have themselves been imprisoned and tortured in the prisons as prisoners in the Islamic Republic have told me personally, I still can't walk properly but I will enlist tomorrow to defend my homeland against these foreign attacks. And I think that is not something that the current president of the United States would really factor in the decision making. And when you say that for sure he's been briefed, I believe you. I don't think it matters. If it registers, I don't think it matters. Last point is this morning, I read an article, some reporting out of, I believe The Guardian was reporting that one of the top UK security advisors named Powell was in those negotiations that were going on at this time that Iran was attacked. And he said that he was surprised by how good of a deal Iran was prepared to offer, how many concessions Iran was prepared to make to secure a deal. Right after the attacks began this time, the Omani foreign minister came out on the talk show circuit and said a deal was at hand, the basic pillars of the agreement had been made, and then we were just calling in the technical advisors to advise us on how to implement the agreements. So an attack at the same time, we have found out from reporting that Israel and the United States decided in November, way before this began, to assassinate Ali Khamenei. So the reporting from this morning from The Guardian said that their assessment, meaning the people who were in the negotiations, their assessment was that Kushner and Witkoff were Israeli assets who were pulling the United States into a war that the United States was trying to get out of. Now, I don't know if that was true or not, but that's what he said. And again, if we look at what he's trying to convey, whether or not it's true, I find that very interesting. I think it says something about where the United States is trying to go from here, because Trump has said openly he will accept nothing but total capitulation. So where does that, again, very contradictory things have been said, as you mentioned, but that's one of them. So that paints us into a corner for what we can conceivably do next.
Just go back to the proxies real fast. I mean, because of the Israeli strikes against Hezbollah, military action against the Houthis, the loss of the Assad regime in Syria also cut off the supply line for Hezbollah from Iran. All of those proxies have been denigrated over the past couple of years. So I remember when after 9/11, Cofer Blackie was the head of our counterterrorism center at CIA, and he's the one who briefed Bush, and he's the one who said he was going to bring bin Laden's head in a box to President Bush, real large life character. But his comment to Bush in the Oval Office was, "Thank God this wasn't Hezbollah, because that's the A-team." And before 9/11, that's what we were working. And Hezbollah had very active cells in the United States. They had them in West Africa. They had them in the tri-border areas in South America. They had them all over the world. We were very concerned about that. But I think those have largely been denigrated. And I'm hoping we're not going to see some kind of terrorist activity from any of those groups, particularly the United States.
Yeah, as I say, to that point, between Quds Force and so Hezbollah's external security organization, their extraterritorial operatives, even the Israelis elevate ESO over Quds Force. Quds Force, a lot of times, have to be rescued or have their operations cleaned up by more senior MILS, right? ESO, in terms of the way Hezbollah recruits, I mean, the training takes years. And if you want to read, you can look up, Google an indictment out of New York, an ESO operative. Sometimes they train for 10, 15 years before they deploy them or before they are allowed to operate. Very, very professional. I don't know I don't know if I share the level of optimism as my good brother here in terms of the degree to which they've been degraded. If you understand the Middle East through the lens of looking at the history of Islam and then, Sunni Islam and Shia Islam, there is like an extra special kind of grit if you are a Shia in the Middle East, because you have your lineage, your religious lineage is one of persecution. And then you look at Iran. Iran is arguably, and I'm not sharing anything that's classified, Iran has arguably been planning for this for like the last 10 and a half years. They have war gamed. Well, if they take this layer, this layer, this layer, this, trust me, they have already thought this through. When you deal with Iran and their proxies, Hezbollah being namely, essentially, if there was going to be, before the the current number of assassinations, life on any significant operation outside of Iran, especially if it's in the West, it would be Hezbollah that would be the one who would be given the green light to do that. When you work Iran and Hezbollah, you understand, or the Quds Force in Hezbollah, three different category or criteria is what you use to assess how how dangerous they are. It's, do they have access to the means to harm you? Right? Do they have the capability to know how to apply that? And number three, do they have the intention? Right? And for years, Iran has always had access to material. They've always been able to move goods, people through the tri-border. There are generations of folks born in tri-border between Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil who were born speaking Arabic. Similarly, in Colombia, Venezuela, to West Africa, into Europe, into Italy, specifically Australia. I think Australia has the largest Lebanese population outside of Lebanon, and again, that's significant because the regime utilizes that diaspora, right, as a part of their global logistics network. So I don't know if I share the level of optimism about their inability, because God forbid if they do decide, okay, well, this is it, tell everybody they got the green light. And I saw reporting, I don't know how accurate it is, but I did see reporting that says the United States intercepted communications that were allegedly the green light communications for sleeper cells. So again, I don't know, I don't know the level of veracity of that information. But if that is true, then that is what worries me, because they have, for years, nurtured and grown these communities of operatives whose sole purpose, kind of like the old Russian model of sleepers, was to be there in case until they get activated to do what the Iranian regime and Hezbollah do very, very well, which is, remember, EFP, explosively formed projectiles, right? Iraq, Afghanistan, that was Iran. Iran was never punished for that. They are very capable at killing. They are very capable at sowing death and destruction. So I'll show it really quick, but I hope that they have been degraded to a point to where they can't, because they are the A team and would make Al Qaeda 9/11 look like child's play.
Right. Now we're at the fun part where there's way more questions than we're gonna have time for. So let's do our best, shall we? I'm gonna start taking 3. So I've got the gentleman in the blue, gentleman in the navy, and then Liz in the back. And then I see you. Gosh, 2 greens, black, and then Jess. All right. So we'll take 3. So starting with yourself.
Yeah, so to the extent that there seems like there's a bit of consensus that using force doesn't necessarily disincentivize fanaticism. The flip side of that is that negotiating in good faith does disincentivize it. With that in mind, is there an alternative, even considering the risks that you're talking about, to an agreement like the JCPOA to sort of lessen the primacy of these proxy forces and coulds in the regime?
I had 2 things. One's a reflection, one's a question. Addressed to the gentleman back. And first off, everything that I say is not a reflection of any organization. It's my personal opinion. But the agency definitely has had a history, I guess, of controversial projects, so to speak. I mentioned Korea quite specifically. And it's hard to say that the 40 years of dictatorship for Korea was a product of, the agencies installing of a dictatorship. A lot of it was due to a lot of anti-communist sentiment, which was also mirrored in the US through McCarthyism. And like Chunduan and Noto, they were Korean intelligence as well as Korean military. But Korea has gone through a lot of bloody past on its path to democracy. But if you look at what it was post or pre-Korean War up to what it is now, the rate of industrialization through the US is astonishing. And it remains one of the highest GDP nations, and the rate of industrialization is quite something. And then as for the panel, like I'm well aware of the extensive network of the Iranian regime. I personally have fought the Iranian aligned militia group in CENTCOM and taken casualties from that. That being said, it was always an enemy that we kind of knew. And now that we've kind of destabilized the region, the two big concerns I think is like how are we managing the info ops, because we don't have a clear end state, and to kind of sell the American public on a continued conflict, we both need to engage in offensive ops, but our currently internal way of how we've pushed out and the defensive info ops has kind of crumbled, and there's a lot of mistrust in the American people now. The second thing is, since this is indefinite as to how long it's going, but we are committed in the fight now, we're seeing a lot of resources drawn out of key regions such as Indo-PACOM, which was always kind of the center of the pacing war. And we've already moved THAAD as well as Patriot batteries out of that region. And that leaves us in a very vulnerable spot in the Indo-PACOM region, especially with Xi Jinping's 2027 goal of taking Taiwan. So how does U.S. national security's broader policy kind of address that issue that we kind of created for ourselves?
I
really like that last
Me, I'd like a one-sentence
No,
response.
sorry,
You're
no.
ignoring a lot of history.
But he asked
and what
him the
you
question.
just said. You're ignoring a lot.
I want to
of
be fair to
history.
all the people that have their
No,
hands
but
up.
he
That's
addressed
fine.
me, so I wanted to respond.
All the way in the back, go for it.
All right, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate taking the time in this important conflict. I also wanted to quickly say I appreciate your emphasis on the fact that the proxy wars that Iran has been carrying out since 1979 have definitely not decreased in efficacy. So I share the same concern and I guess pessimism, unfortunately. And I appreciate that you've highlighted that. But I have something written down. More broadly speaking, as someone who's in the diaspora, as a Persian Iranian and a Jewish American, it's really difficult for me to position myself also being an American patriot and where I stand in this conflict. And it's really helpful to hear your perspectives in order to kind of grapple with all of the different goals that we're kind of seeing thrown out there by the three nations and involved allies. I'm trying to understand the deeper disagreement that I'm hearing about the ends as well as the means, because I don't think we have an agreement on it. When we hear like Trump's goal is regime change and Israel's goal is full entire government collapse, I don't know if everybody necessarily agrees on that. And that worries me, right? Because we're having a post-truth issue here. And I would love to hear from your perspective in your points in intelligence and academia, what you think the United States goal should actually be for peace and security in the Middle East, because I think that's the broader thing that we need to be focused on, right? Is it regime change in Iran? Is it behavioral change from the existence regime? Is it containment? I think there's this gap in my own research and my family context in Iran, where we have this understanding that a lot of people have been celebrating and begging for U.S. intervention and Israel's intervention in this conflict because of what the IRGC has done to Iranians. At the same time, I really appreciate the point that, you know, it's not all black and white. Just taking out Khamenei was not, you know, end all be all. So definitely those points I would love to hear how you grapple with.
Perfect. Hard questions, so we keep it short. Yeah, get another round in.
Well, I would say I don't agree that the Israelis want instability in the region. It's not in their interest to have a country of 90 million people that's basically, you know, that's dysfunctional. Yeah, there's a lot of again, back to, if we're going to support regime change, we need to figure out what that means. I think also Israelis have a relationship with Reza Pahlavi. There was a relationship between Iran and Israel before the revolution. It's a complicated relationship. There's the Baha'i. Well, the Baha'i also have a holy site in Israel.
There was even a relationship after the revolution between Iran and Israel.
I didn't know that, but it's complicated. There's room for going forward, I think, in this, whatever this regime looks like. But we have to be careful what we do.
Yeah, on that point, I think, and this is going to sound right, like, you know, kind of, you know, flowery and esoteric, but like the only pathway to stability and, dare I say peace, is to center the Iranian people on whatever the solution is going to be. None of what we've heard the pundits or other people talk about centers the Iranian people. That's the only way anything is going to work, right? Is to figure out how do we enable 90 million people from a culture over 2,000 years old, right? That has so much potential. That's the only way. And so I have not yet heard that. And so that is my recommendation, is that's where we need to start, is centering the Iranian people at whatever solution we're going to work towards. I think, there's the question about, broader national security implications. Man, guess who's got his shit parked off the coast, collecting all the signals intelligence and basically mapping the entire battle theater? The People's Republic of China. Also, guess who's providing targeting support to the Iranian regime? The Russians, right? And if you're not aware, China just is in the process of the most recent purge, and they just recently got rid of their most senior general, who was one of the last remaining people who actually had combat experience, right? And there are probably going to be a lot more to go. And so they're going to have to basically reestablish their capacity to confidently potentially wage war. And man, they are learning a lot right now. They are learning a lot about what the United States capabilities are, where our gaps in capability are. And also, guess what? We've been providing bombs and bullets to Ukraine and Israel for the last 3 years. We don't have it in infinite supply. So assets, material, personnel, that's what I'm worried about, bro, is, okay, this is not the only crisis in the world that we have to contend with. And that's what also worries me about the Iranian people, is that I don't want to make this political, I'm going to keep it subjective. That's what worries me, is that they're an afterthought in all of this. Like a few other people in the world who used to be able to rely on the United States. And so I think it's going to get painful to a point where the American people, how do we message? I think the American people at least should be asking a lot of questions right now. Congress was not consulted. The Gang of Eight, I think 24 hours before, was given the heads up, but Congress was not a part of the decision. So the information, how do we manage that? How do you manage that when there's not even a consensus within the American government and the Israeli government about what we're actually doing there and what the objective is? So what do you message? It's unfortunate. And again, going back to all the while we're in the United States are talking and debating this, the Iranian people are suffering, right? And so, it's unfortunate for all the reasons that we've all talked about, but I agree. I share your concerns about the broader national security implications. To your question about what is the recommendation, I would love to hear Sahar's about what is viable. But I think the only thing that has to be viable is a solution that centers the Iranian people at the core of that.
Try to keep this very brief. I am also concerned in the same ways that you are about the depletion of weapons, but maybe not for the same reasons. You may know that Iranian drones and missiles are much cheaper, which you've already mentioned, but the reason is because of sanctions. The reason is they've had to domesticate their industries, and that it's much cheaper and faster for them to make these drones and missiles than it is for the United States to make Patriot interceptors. And so we're spending $2 or $3 million a pop. We're going through them really fast. And Iran has a lot of drones left. And they can make them very fast. And they get support for that from Russia and China, as you mentioned. So what's going to happen after that? Again, you're probably in a better position to know this than me. But what I see coming down the pike is that I actually think it's more likely that opportunistic actors, non-Iranian, will then use the United States' vulnerability, which you alluded to attack in other ways, right? Could be cyber attacks, could be outright other kinds of attacks. I don't want to speculate. And Iran in that is going to be able to keep their hands clean publicly and then we could see dramatic downstream effects for everybody involved. I think that's more likely than sleeper cells being activated in the United States to take out people. But what do I know? Really, I have no idea. Now I want to briefly speak to the point from the lovely person in the back. I very much feel how conflicted this moment is to be an Iranian American, any kind of background, but for yours especially, that's the intersection of a lot of tensions. One of my points of research is the diaspora and diaspora wars, and that puts me at the center of a lot of storms, unfortunately. But it also means that I can speak a little bit to this. Are people celebrating or not? A lot of people who are celebrating there was widespread relief at the death of Ali Khamenei, because he was the architect of a lot of the repression and violence Iranians have experienced for the past several decades. That does not necessarily translate into widespread support for the war. Iran, as you've heard several times, is a very diverse country of the 93 million people. That means there are going to be people celebrating and asking and waiting for the intervention, and there are going to be people who are absolutely opposed to it for a variety of reasons. And they might be united in being anti-regime, but they have their own all kinds of reasons, right? A lot of them have the experience of the Iran-Iraq war, and they don't want to go back to that. And I have seen also reports from on the ground showing that people who initially supported the attacks are now feeling the effects, and they are feeling disillusioned. They're feeling abandoned. They're saying, "You told us you weren't going to hit residential blocks, and now my wife and baby are dead." Like this is only going to get worse, in my opinion. What can we do? Well, I guess it depends on who you ask. If you ask the Iranian government, we can, gather up all the bases and leave. If you ask the Iranian government, it's not their fault that we put our bases right next to them and then now say that our bases are under threat, right? That's their answer. If you ask Iranian civil society, most people in those organizations are telling you, we have plenty of people inside Iran who have lived every single day of their lives struggling within this system. We know what the power structures are. We have organized opposition parties, opposition figures, release the political prisoners. You'll have cadres of leadership suddenly available. There are calls for an internationally mediated transition to democracy. We can support those, but we have to also, whatever we do, if we are really concerned about democracy in Iran, we should not add more fuel to the ideological axis of resistance fire that they are burning right now, because that strengthens that.
All right, I've got 4 minutes and like 18 different people that want in, so I'm gonna go from my list. So I had dark green, City Microsoft, yeah, and then I'm gonna come to black shirt up front. Oh, the white shoes, right? Yeah, we're relative, perfect.
Yeah, I just want to kind of respond to Dr. Razavi's point here. Just a couple of things. The regime and the people are quite different, and to think that first of all, the negotiations were at all supportive or good for the Iranians to begin with is no longer the case. That might have been something during the Obama administration, but now it's been very clear that, especially during every single crackdown, every single protest, the Iranian people are simply not armed. They can't fight the regime, and they get killed. And I want to just challenge you a little bit on that. And you actually said, "Oh, the 30,000 number isn't correct," and it's actually way higher than that. And there was a part of desperation on the Iranian people to be able to come back and say, we need some help to get rid of this regime. And it's kind of ironic that you would say that you wouldn't want some of these maybe conflicts or leaders to be killed. Although there's collateral damage, there's actually very widespread support for Iranians because they're so desperate that they need some help from outside. And there is an opposition leader right now, and it is Reza Pahlavi, as much as you might not like it or not want to support him. But the people want freedom, and the only way to achieve that freedom, unfortunately, has to be through foreign intervention. So downplaying kind of what the regime has done, even saying that the Khamenei has provided a fatwa, we all know that's garbage. There's nothing religious about this guy. He has persecuted, killed millions of Iranians over his tenure. So there's nothing religious or fatwa-like about the way he leads. And to use that as a reason to say he was providing peace or he was trying to keep things calm, I think it's complete garbage argument because he wasn't trying to do that as he was killing 50,000 Iranians during the protest.
It's basically, it's basically the complexity of the case. I'll go to the back, sorry.
Yeah, just a quick question. You all agree that this was bad decision. How do you make ends meet? Is this an irrational president with an irrational ally in Netanyahu that took this decision and not knowing where we're going from here?
Very good. Brent, nice and short.
Yes. So I'll address this theory question to everyone. I've heard some sources say that the decision not only gives a political alignment with Israel, but rather to take Iran off the table as a provider of energy towards it. I think we want fire in 2027. Would you think that narrative resonates more with Americans as opposed to what seems like Iraq? Seems to make this as most popular American war history. So with that, maybe still at hope. And I'm not going to
Perfect. 30 seconds each. We're at time. Thank you, Jeff. I'll start with you and then work down.
So the China question, I don't think the American public still appreciates which is not hyperbole, the existential threat that the People's Republic of China presents. So I think that argument would be lost on them. They're like, okay, yeah, I get it. Energy, China, 2077. Okay, yeah, right. Wait, do I even really want to send American forces into harm's way to protect the Taiwanese? Right. So I don't think that argument is winnable because the American public, to your point about Iraq, make the case that this is not Iraq 2.0. Like make that case. Obviously, there's more nuance, but make the case to the average American that this isn't Iraq 2.0. So on the China point.
Yeah, just to your point, yeah, I don't think the China question would resonate with the American people, but your point is well taken. There are plenty of reasons to justify this that the American people will understand. Pick one, and communicate.
Okay, so how do I do this in 30 seconds? I'm going to skip the security question in the interest of time because they're more qualified than me to talk about that, and I want to address the question that came directly at me. So the first thing is, I don't know if you caught this when I was giving the answer. Maybe I'm too long-winded about it, but I wasn't kind of defending the fatwa. I was saying the fact that he felt that he needed to present that publicly, even if that's not what Iran was pursuing behind closed doors, said something. And my argument is that hardline factions are being strengthened each time. Now, that's something that we see throughout the history of the Islamic Republic. As for the number of protesters killed, I actually didn't downplay it. I said, we don't know. That's all I said. It could be more, it could be less. The number that he mentioned was 30,000. I just said, we don't have an exact number. So that's the honest truth. We really don't have an exact number. Could be more, could be less. We are waiting to see. The last thing is, as far as like, do the Iranian people want this? And is Reza Pahlavi the one? That is a much bigger question. That is a much bigger question than what I can tell you now, or I believe, with all due respect, you would be able to tell anyone. 93 million people plus 5 or 6 million in the diaspora means we're talking about 100 million people. And my concern with that line of reasoning is that we, in our desperation, which you alluded to see something better after this, that we use the concept of unity as a cudgel to silence other voices, because ultimately that is not conducive to democracy.
I think one of the things that definitely is worth taking away from the panel is just the degree of uncertainty about means, ends, both in terms of how this started, how this is going to end. So really appreciate all three of you sharing your perspectives. Please join me in thanking the panel.
Hey, can I say something?
Yeah.
I was gonna say, if this type of thing is of interest to you, we are trying to create more opportunities for engagement, for respectful disagreement. We welcome disagreement. We welcome questions because as you can all see, well, again, I'm trying to be political. If you want to see more of this, the Institute for International Studies, the Berkeley Risk and Security Lab, the Institute for Security and Governance, let us know. We've got some proposed programming of this kind. And so if there are questions that you all come across, whether it's in the headlines or personally, like let's talk about it. We have a pretty vast network and we can reasonably get folks to speak. And again, not to tell you how to think, present the facts as we've experienced them and challenge you to say, well, why are we doing the same thing that we did 50 years ago or 20 years ago? Why do we keep doing the same thing and expecting different results, right? Again, not to tell you how to think, I just say, well, I served and this is how it is. No, this is my perspective. This was my experience, right? The only way this social experiment works, right, is if we all engage, have conversation, right, challenge each other with the facts, right, remain respectful. That's the only hope that we have of being better than we've been, and orienting, right, our faith in a way that hopefully aligns with, I'm sure many other things that most of us, if we're not even, whether we're citizens or not, are in this country as a result of. So I just say thank you all for showing up. And like I said, if this is something of interest to you, we hopefully will have more programming like this so that you all can engage and interact.
I was a chemistry guy before, boss. I'm really into the next stuff.
Sorry, it's gone. I know. I don't know why we don't make the, that was
Like our.
Oh, wait, there's a fan right here. Yeah, where's it? Right here. There's the fan.
Okay, I'll work it out.
I just realized that.
Right now. No, it's okay.
What are these walkers?
So look at that. I sent you exactly what I did there. And I go back. Sorry, what?
I know, like, so this is. Essentially. Just one more awesome. A little bit more. Right? It's like,